Like the third tip in this sequence, what follows comes from our intellectual tradition. It's a set of 6 practical suggestions. Given the decrease in attention spans, it's astounding that about a century ago there was a best-selling book with the title The Art of Thinking. It was by a Frenchman, Abbe Ernest Dimnet. John Dewey thought highly of it, as did Jim Howard, the headmaster of Blair Academy where I graduated. Dimnet believed, quote, that 19 people in 20 do not think but live like automata. Nothing is more striking than the absence of intellectual independence in most human beings, end quote. Thinkers are inherently teachers and leaders. He agreed with Goethe that the man who has been of his own time has really been of all times. Thinking well requires solitude, freedom, and leisure. When I first read his book as an undergraduate, there were 6 recommendations that I took to heart. I recommend each of them for your consideration. First, social life should be reduced to a minimum. As I record this talk, I've lived alone for over 30 years. Not much social life there. Second, don't read to pass the time. Reading is helpful only if one uses it not to kill time, but to engage authors in conversation. In other words, to stimulate thought. This requires concentration and disinterestedness as well as solitude. René Descartes made a similar recommendation. I don't always follow this one. For example, I've read a lot of pulp fiction such as mysteries, in addition to a lot of valuable philosophy and literature. Still, Dimnet's recommendation is a good one. Third, quote, an hour in the morning is worth 2, end quote, later in the day. This isn't true for all people. It's true for morning people, though, and most of us are morning people when our brains are freshest. In my own case, Dimnet's claim was accurate. For example, when I was grading papers, exams, or journals submitted by students, the average time it took in the afternoon was double the time it took in the morning. Fourth, writing is very helpful to thinking. It's really a way of thinking. Always keep the means of writing ready to hand. As for me, years ago I became somewhat notorious among close friends for writing letters of 5 or 10 pages. These days I try to keep emails below 1,000 words, but I often fail. Fifth, don't read good books. Why? Life is too short for that. Instead, only read the best books. In fact, our maxim should be, never read, always study. When we read, always adopt what he calls, quote, the fundamental philosophical attitude, end quote, namely, always be questioning. Take every bit of content as a problem. For example, when reading a daily newspaper, read it for what it actually is, namely, a page of history that should be comprehended. Having been a philosopher for over 60 years, I'm guilty of a long-standing questioning attitude. Sixth, and finally, quote, treat intuitions tenderly, unquote. In other words, think out an idea. Think it through without premature evaluation. Have you ever had an original idea for a new product or service and dismissed it for some reason or other, only later to discover that someone else had produced it and it was selling well? If so, perhaps you were too hard on it too early. Think of an intuition as like a small plant that has just broken through the surface of the earth. At that stage, it's very vulnerable. If it survives, in a few years, it might grow into a mighty oak tree. Let your intuitions grow. Let them play out in your mind. Don't be too quick to kill them. You may eventually drop them all, but one never knows about such things. Just one intuition in your lifetime can prove very beneficial. As the author of something like 34 books and multiple websites, I know how to take an idea and run with it. Some of them may still even be worth reading. So, there you have 6 practical tips for thinking better. I recommend them all, based on my own experience. May you too find them beneficial. Peace.